Ch66 Everblaze. Sophie's body started to shake, but not from the Arctic air. She barely felt the wind or the snow or the sharp jostling of what she assumed was an ogre carrying her. The world grew dim as the blackness clouded her mind, and red rimmed the edges of her vision as the fear and fury boiled into a frenzy. She let the rage to as long as she could bear it. Then she shoved the bitterness out of her head, spreading the pain and wrath as far as it could travel. Her captor grunted and dropped her, but when she sank into the ice, the cold bored her into her bones, breaking her concentration and leaving her numb and useless. She lay there shivering, knowing she should run, but her head was spinning, spinning, spinning. The air was so thin, it felt like she wasn't even breathing, and she was so tired. Maybe if she just closed her eyes. Thick hands hoisted her up and she tried to trash, but her muscles were too weak. She barely managed a raspy scream before cold metal was shoved over her nose and she could breathe. She gulped the sweet, soft air as a heavy white cloak wrapped around her shoulders, shielding her from the icy wind. "I've got you," a high, squeaky voice promised, and it took her a second to realize it was Sandor. He hefted her over his shoulder, and she tightened her grip as Sander started to slide down the steep embankment. They'd only gone a few feet when something yanked Sander backward. Sophie slipped from his arms, stumbling through the snow, trailed by howls and snarls and growls and whimpers. She couldn't tell which massive body was Sander's in the glimpses she caught through the blasting snow, but she could tell he was battling an ogre. And when an agonizing screech splattered red among the pristine white, she scrambled toward the collapsed body, promising she would never give Sander a hard time again if it would just not be him. A blur of gray muscle yanked her away, and it took her a second to recognize the familiar flat-nosed face. "You're not dead!" she cried, feeling her tears freeze before they could fall. "Neither is he," Sander grunted as he shifted her weight into his body onto his other shoulder. That's when she felt the warm wetness seeping from his chest. "You're bleeding!" These conditions have slowed my reflexes, especially without the purifier. Sophie reached for the oxygen mask he'd given her, but he grabbed her hand, smearing her palm with blood. "Sorry," he murmured, wiping her hand on a clean part of his chest. "You need that far more than me. I can breathe relatively naturally up here. It just makes everything foggy. That's what cost me my sword." "Where's everyone else?" Sophie asked, trying to see through the white out around them. "I do not know. Their dwarves came up through the ground as I chased after you, but I'm hoping your friends are still waiting near the outcropping. Is your head clear enough to teleport?" "I think so," she said, sucking in another breath. "But I'm not leaving." "Yes, you are. And don't even think about." A wall of muscle slammed him from behind, sending Sander crashing on top of her. The thick snow saved Sophie from the bulk of his crushing weight, but the fall still knocked the wind out of her, leaving her coughing and wheezing as Sander pushed himself to his feet. He'd barely gone 2 steps before the massive ogre tackled him again, tearing at Sander's neck and chest with his pointed teeth as they stumbled over the ground. "You're going over, flat nose," the ogre shouted as he shoved Sander toward the edge. "If I do, you're coming with me." Sander widened his stance, holding his bleeding arms at the ready. "Deal." The ogre launched himself at Sander with all of his strength, the collision so loud it knocked Sander back another step. They wobbled once, twice, then toppled off the cliff. "No!" Sophie screamed, sprinting to where they'd fallen. The drop had to be at least 1,000 feet, and all she could see at the bottom was red. 67 Everblaze. "Sandor!" Sophie screamed, her chest heaving with sobs as she searched for a way to climb down the embankment. She glanced over the edge, wondering if she could see enough details to teleport down to him when a deep voice spoke behind her. "Surrender, Sophie, and no one else has to die." She spun around, feeling her whole body shake with rage as 3 black-cloaked figures stepped through the blinding white swells. Glints of silver flashed in their hands, and Sophie realized they each carried a melder. She pulled her fear and fury, spinning it into an angry swarm in her mind, but before she could inflict any of it, a sharp blast of pain flared in her chest, dropping her like a stone. She was trying to inflict, a familiar voice shouted as the other 2 figures accused him of violating their orders. Besides, all he said was to bring her in alive. He didn't say anything about untouched. Sophie tried to move, tried to scream, but the melder had paralyzed her from head to toe, forcing her to lie still and watch as the figures drew closer. The one who'd shot her leaned over the edge and laughed. Looks like we don't have to worry about her bodyguard. Sophie raged inside her mind as the others shared in his laughter. She tried to channel the energy into a force she could blast them with. But the melder must have done something to her heart. No matter how hard she concentrated, she couldn't find the force she needed to launch any emotions. Let's go, one of the other figures said as he crouched in front of Sophie and waved a hand in front of her face. Think she's stunned enough? Might as well be safe. The one who shot her told him, blasting Sophie again. Lightning surged through Sophie's veins and the iron taste of blood coated her tongue. She stared at the dark spaces where the figures' faces hid behind their cloaks, vowing to make them pay the next time she got the chance. But for the moment, all she could do was endure the agony and try not to wonder how much worse the pain had been for Dex when they blasted him 3 times on the streets of Paris. That should do it. The third figure, who had yet to speak, decided, grab her and let's get out of here. What about the boy? The one in front of Sophie asked. Which boy? The Vacker one? He'd only been an asset to the girl. No, the boy who led us here. He can't be allowed to go home. Why? Kif shouted, stepping through the wall of wind and snow, looking like a ghost in his white hooded cloak and boots. Fitz flanked him, pointing his melder at the figure closest to Sophie as Kif asked. Afraid I'll tell Mom? The figure stood, his laugh so cold Sophie shivered inside. Trust me, he told Kif, your mother is not my concern. His voice was clearer now, and Sophie recognized it as Lord Cassius. Kif must have noticed it too, because he looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Is this really what you do? Kif asked, choking slightly when he pointed to Sophie's paralyzed form. Is that the Sensen legacy? No, it's a necessary sacrifice for a larger plan. I hate you, Kif screamed, grabbing a chunk of ice and flinging it at his father's head. Lord Cassius stepped to the side and the ice breezed past him, plummeting over the edge and falling so far Sophie couldn't hear it crash. Sander had fallen the same way. She shook the heartbreaking thought away, forcing herself to focus. Lord Cassius was stomping the snow off his boots as he told Keith, you hate only because you do not understand. I am building you a better world. Someday you'll thank me. I will never thank you, Keith told him, backing a step away. I will never speak to you again. Well, then it's going to be a very quiet day. Get in, grab the girl, Lord Cassius ordered, pointing to the figure who'd shot Sophie. We'll take all 3 of them. Don't come any nearer, Fitz warned him, pointing his smelter at Getten's head. Getten laughed and aimed his smelter at Sophie. Shoot me and I'll shoot her again, and she's already taken several blasts. How many more do you think that freaky little mind of hers can handle? Sophie can handle anything, Kif shouted, hurling another chunk of ice and smashing Getten's arm so hard it knocked the melder out of his hand. Getten scrambled to retrieve it, but Fitz blasted him in the chest, dropping him to the snow like a lump of coal before Fitz dove for the melder and tossed it to Kif. Fitz spun to check on Sophie as she watched Kif stalk closer to his father. I knew all that bramble practice would come in handy, Kif told him, and you said it was a foolish game. Lord Cassius laughed. Put it down, son. I'm not your son. Yes, you are, and you will always be. And regardless of what you may think, I don't want to hurt you. Funny, I will have no problem blasting the snot out of you. Then let's take stock of your situation, shall we? We have your dwarves outnumbered 3 to 1. Your bodyguard is dead. Sandor? Fitz and Keith both asked. Yes, poor Oaf took a dive off that cliff, and last I checked, goblins can force shift like ogres. So he raised his hand, miming a diving potion that ended in a splatter. Sophie was glad she couldn't move, because she would have tossed him over the edge. And last we saw, your puppy leader was pinned down by at least a dozen of our dwarves, Lord Cassius added. I'm sure they'll be delivering him to us any minute now, so it's over. Set down your weapons and we'll bring you in with no further injuries. No, I don't think we will, Kif said, taking a slow step towards Sophie, because I think you forgot to take stock of your situation. Three scrawny kids, one of whom is currently paralyzed, Lord Keisha started, but Keith shook his head. Not three, four. Now! Fitz shouted as Biana appeared and tackled Kif's father. Fitz dropped the other figure with a melder blast, and Kif took over the fight with his dad. Biana ran to Sophie's side and pulled her away from the ledge, twisting her into a sitting position so she could place her fingers at the base of Sophie's skull. This is going to hurt, but it'll pull you out of the daze. My dad taught me just in case. Sophie could not, but she held her breath, bracing for the worst as Biana dug her fingers into the tender skin right where Sophie's neck met her skull. Pain surged immediately, like Biana had awoken some sort of beast and let it tear around inside her, and when she loosened her grip, Sophie fell to her side, coughing and thrashing and wondering if she was going to be sick. Biana helped her to her feet, wrapping Sophie's shaky arm across her shoulders and pulling her back towards Fitz. No, Sander, Sophie said between gasping breaths. He might be. Need to check. We will, Biana promised as they came up alongside Fitz. As soon as Skip's ready. How's he doing? She asked Fitz. Fitz could only shake his head and point. A sheet of white blocked most of the view, but she could vaguely discern two cloaked figures scaling on another incline, one in black, the other nearly invisible in white. Sophie, Fitz, and Biana climbed after them. Chunks of snow slipped under Sophie's feet, and she wished she had the heavy boots Fitz and Biana were wearing. Their progress was painfully slow until Fitz found icy ropes they could hold on to. He stayed behind her to catch her if she slipped, and they pulled themselves up, stopping at a new ledge that stretched to a relatively flat area. The whiteout barely let them see 5 feet in any direction, but they shoved blindly forward until Biana grabbed their arms and pointed to a smear of black among the white. A few more steps and they could see Kip and his father standing in the winds. They weren't fighting, they were just staring, and when Sophie moved closer, she understood why. The wind, or maybe Kif, must have thrown back his father's hood, but it wasn't his father's facing him. It was Lady Gisela, Kif's mom.